Before January 2015 and the election of Maithripala Sirisena as president of the country, the human rights situation was really quite appallingly bad. First of all, you had the white van culture where people were too frightened to talk about anything, to express dissent for fear of being disappeared effectively. So they practiced a culture of self-censorship. In addition to that, there were extrajudicial killings. There were the whole series of attacks on journalists, for example, the militarization of the North. So there were a number of areas wherever you looked where the state was using its power and authority to suppress dissent and thereby violating the fundamental rights of people, and they were getting away with it without any kind of punishment. The culture of impunity was widespread. You could do anything you wanted to and get away with it because you were being protected by the state. So we had finished a war, but we hadn't finished a conflict. In fact, we were sustaining and reproducing the sources of conflict. We started the attacks on the Muslims. We continued and increased the attacks on the evangelical Christians. So the situation was one of a majoritarian populism in which no dissent was tolerated. The culture of impunity from the Bodu Balasena to the ordinary Pradesha Sabha member was rampant in the country. It was a very bad situation indeed, and the election of 2015 promised to change that. Now, to be fair to the Yahapalana government, indeed, the biggest thing that it has done, and it will probably get no votes for this because people take this for granted, is to have got rid of that culture of suppression, the white van culture, that culture that told you that you can't say what you thought, that fundamental essence of democracy that you had. That has come back. No more do we have the white van culture. People are free to demonstrate, to engage in the freedom of expression, the freedom of speech in any number of ways that they can. That's one. Secondly, the Yahapalaniya program promised institutions of justice, of transitional justice in particular, which they felt was absolutely necessary to make the bridge from the situation before 2009 when the war was going on and after 2009 when the war had ended. So the mechanisms of transitional justice have also been brought to the forefront. The Office of Missing Person, granted it took more than a year to be instituted, has been set up. The Constitutional Council has appointed the various people to the Office of Missing Persons, and that has been set up. The bill with regard to the Office on Reparations has come to Cabinet, has come to Parliament, has gone to the Supreme Court. That has been passed. It is awaiting the Constitutional Council to appoint the persons. The bill with regard to the Commission on Justice and Peace and Reconciliation, that has yet to be brought to Parliament. And of course the one with regard to accountability, where the whole question of the international participation of judges, that probably will not happen. If it is to happen, it will take quite some time. So there has been some progress, but with regard to the return of land, yes, for instance, land has been returned, but still a lot of land has to be returned. The questions with regard to recently, with regard to the sacking of the Prime Minister, the dismissal of Parliament, the setting of the executive against the legislature. Now, these are also human rights issues because they go to the heart of the whole question of what is a citizen empowered to do in a democracy. Does he or she have the choice of who the Prime Minister of the country is going to be? And is that choice not exercised through the elected representatives in Parliament? Or is it to be exercised by the President, behaving like a monarch, a king, and sort of saying, I want this person to be Prime Minister. I don't care whether he has the support of Parliament or not. I don't like this Parliament if it doesn't support my choice of Prime Minister, and therefore I want to dismiss it. So the gains that we had in 2015 seem to be in some way kind of pushed back, reversed in some way by what has happened in terms of the constitutional coup that has been effected by Maithripala Sirisena as president of the country. And therefore, in order to get back on track, we need to recalibrate, to reorganize that coalition of 2015, get the reform agenda back on track with constitutional reform, with transitional justice, reinstitute the properly elected, legitimately elected, legally elected, constitutionally elected government of the country, and then they can decide whether they are going to go for a general election and therefore provide the votes to make the two-thirds majority to dissolve Parliament, or whether they are going to continue for the full-term Parliament before they go for an election. In any way, 2019 we will have elections. We will definitely have a presidential election. We probably have provincial council elections and maybe a general election as well. But in order to prevent the most dangerous precedent in terms of our democracy being set, we have to reinstitute the Ranil Wickremesinghe government before we can do anything else. Now, as it stands, the quo warranto case that the Court of Appeal gave interim relief for, Mahinda Rajapaksa has appealed against it in the Supreme Court. But basically, he cannot function as Prime Minister, nor can his purported cabinet of ministers. So we are in a very strange situation in which we have a president, but from having two prime ministers, now we don't have a single prime minister. We don't have a government. This has to be resolved by the president turning around and saying, I think, well, first of all, telling himself that he has to stop behaving in a silly fashion and reinstitute the Wickremesinghe government, and then the Wickremesinghe government can take whatever necessary steps are required to dissolve Parliament and go for a general election. Likewise, the dismissal of Ranil Wickremesinghe and the dismissal of Parliament, the full case is now being heard in the Supreme Court. It started today, it will continue tomorrow and day after, and the final verdict will be given soon thereafter. Hopefully, it will be one which turns around and says that the President indeed acted illegally and unconstitutionally. So now we have come to a position where people have been woken up by this coup against the Constitution to get more interested in what the Constitution of the country is. Is it the supreme law of the land? Is it really the legal framework under which everything operates? Who can appoint the Prime Minister? Whose function is it really to appoint the Prime Minister? Those are key questions for government and governance in the country. And given that civil society all over the country has got interested in this, and not interested on behalf of a single individual or a single party, but interested in it on the grounds that it is about the Constitution, it is about democracy, it is about who the Prime Minister is going to be and how he functions. I think that is a great ray of hope, a great opportunity that we have to get our citizens much more involved in the government and therefore much more involved in the decisions that affect their daily lives.